Because our last speaker today will be Jonathan Woolston, and his title is Restoration, a Sound Practice, and it has to do, I understand, with problems about craquelures in a violin. Please, Jonathan.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me here to speak today. I'm the light entertainment at the end of the day, I think, although I'm not going to play an instrument because I didn't bring one with me. But you know, there are a few similarities between violins and panel paintings. I mean, the most obvious one is that they're made of wood and they are painted on one side. And the other thing is that violins were made by very highly skilled craftsmen, passing down their skill through an apprenticeship system, which usually started when usually boys were very young, maybe even as young as 11 or 12. The other thing that's interesting about them is they're of great historical importance and have great monetary value, and have been made to be enjoyed, I think, for a long time. Of course, they also share similar problems, and the climate is one of the main problems that causes splits and other things to happen. And flying around the world, of course, has increased that problem, especially for musicians who have concerts one day in England and maybe the next day in Alberta, where it's incredibly dry, and if they're not humidity aware, they can end up with a problem, a split or something, and usually these splits are in the front. But usually, if the violin is maintained very well, something else might come apart, like a seam, and the pressure will be dissipated or released. And fortunately, it's then when a musician actually seeks attention and goes to a violin maker to have that seam glued up. And unfortunately, at that point, sometimes that's when more problems can occur, because the seam that's glued, if they use very strong glue, and most people are using animal glue, there's nobody using, except maybe the ill-advised amateur, but nobody in the profession is using synthetic glues. They're not using PVAs or anything like that, so they're using an animal glue. But as you know, the strength of animal glue is you can have weak book-binding glue, but you can also get very strong animal glues. And the thing is, if the seam is glued with very strong animal glue, then the next time there's a sudden snap in humidity or something, there's no longer that release, and the table is held very strongly in place, and that is when a split can occur. There are also other reasons why splits occur. But in the normal scheme of things, the glue joint, when it's cycled through the climate, will tend to break down anyway, and eventually the glue joint will probably come apart. It's interesting to note at this point that possibly there are no joints in a violin, and it's only recently or fairly recently, when the necks were lengthened, that we have a mortise and tenon. It's actually a dovetail mortise and tenon of a neck joint. Traditionally, the necks were nailed in, and all the construction is flat pieces of wood or bent pieces of wood glued onto a similarly shaped surface. And also, that's another reason why when the glue gives, that joint will just pop apart. There's nothing really constraining it. But unlike panel paintings, of course, the front and back are actually held in place around the perimeter, which is obviously would be very damaging for a panel painting to have that, unless there was some method of spring attachments and some of the things that I've seen and heard today, which is really fantastic. But unfortunately, the musicians won't actually buy that, you know, and the instruments just, I don't think would sound very good if they had these springs on there. But anyway, briefly, just a brief history about violins and where, you know, sort of where they come from. The violins first appeared in the 1500s, and they're seen depicted in many paintings. Sometimes they're violin-like. They might be a rebec or a viola or something like that. But basically, the instruments that are played under the chin or on the chest and held by the neck. In the sort of early 1500s, that's what we tend to see. And Andrea Amati was, which is what this is not a panel, this is a section of a back, and I'll show you the instrument a little later. But basically, these are some of the earliest known examples of work by a maker with the original label. And this particular instrument, which is in that category, was made in 1564. And basically, these instruments were made for Charles IX, and himself a boy at the time that these were commissioned, and they were commissioned by his mother. And basically, this is the instrument here. They were made as one of a set of about we believe about 38 instruments, and they would have kept Andrea Amati probably in his life work. But it's very interesting to know that he was about 60 years old when this instrument was made. So I imagine that he was making instruments before then as part of this commission, and maybe they lost their label or something like that. Because of this commission, Catherine de Medici, she was basically responsible for bringing violins and their music to Northern Europe, because before then there were not these instruments. There are several examples of this very early commission on display, notably in England at Tully House, and the earliest one is in the Ashmolean Museum in 1564. And there's also a very early one on display at the Royal Academy where I work. And it's very interesting to note that it seems there are no instruments earlier than this that can be sort of that we know of for sure, because of the fact that there's no labels. Maybe violins weren't labeled then, but the thing is that this instrument is already a very sophisticated piece of machinery, and it seems that all the elements of construction have been very carefully thought about, and these instruments are really testament to that, because all through moving from different climates and that they've actually remained quite relatively intact. And of course, I mean, this instrument has one or two splits, but nothing of a very serious nature. And of course, it's still playable. And the inscription around the side, incidentally, is piety and justice. And it would have been the words that Charles IX communicated to the Italian maker, and who presumably got the local painter, who was also very good at painting, to sort of paint his design on the back. And then they were shipped out to France, where the painting is no longer visible. You can see a sort of black shadow, and I guess that's some underpainting for the gold that would have gone on top. And now the instruments are made of normally violins are made from maple and spruce for the top, and this is the material by choice. And obviously there must have been some experimentation that went on, but because of the apprenticeship system, these very specific details were passed down as this is the ideal material for this particular instrument. And most instruments are actually made from spruce, for the soundboards at least. And the materials normally for the front and back and sides and scroll are always quarter sawn. It's not always the case. Sometimes the backs are slab sawn. And sometimes in earlier instruments, especially in the viol family, the tops were slab sawn as well. But normally for instruments in the violin family, it's normally quarter sawn. And as you probably all know, I mean, it's the most stable cut of wood. And obviously they were thinking of the stability at the time. And this too would have been passed down. It wouldn't have been written down. It's probably like the Stradivari varnish and all that. Nothing, very little was written down. It was just passed on. But the Amati family were a dynasty of violin makers that spanned about 4 generations, and Niccolo, who is the only known master violin maker to survive the Great Plague and also teach his son Hieronymus too. There was another Hieronymus earlier in the family who died many years before. And it is thought that Niccolo also taught Stradivari and Guarneri, and although there's no documentary evidence to actually connect them, but certain details in the construction actually you can see a trait, even though these makers had very strong characters of their own, and one violin pretty much looks like another until you actually study the detail. And it was Stradivari that experimented a little more with not with the constructional details. The constructional detail was pretty much set, but what he did was experiment with the shape of the violin, also with the arching and contour, which give the contour gives the actual tone of the violin. And basically, from 1700 on, Stradivari actually brought the violin to the absolute peak of perfection as we see it from this time. His instruments were very powerful, very sonorous, and they're actually in demand by soloists all over the world, along with the Guarneri family. But again, it's interesting to know that when he actually had his golden period, he was already a very skilled craftsman, and he was 60 years old. He actually went on to live into his 90s, and but also passed on his skill to his sons. And I think this is why the violin has lasted as it has. This is probably this is one of the most famous Stradivari's in the world. It's the Ex Viotti. It remains to us with one little crack. If I can get this pointer to work, the soundpost crack in the front. I think there's a little crack down here. There's no evidence of cracking in the back. There's a slight bit of woodworm in the side, but basically, this instrument is a soloist's dream. Fortunately, it's housed in the gallery at the Royal Academy of Music. It is the gallery of at the Royal Academy is actually it's a living gallery. It houses over 300 instruments, but all of them are played, including this one. This is featured on 1 or 2 recordings, and a lot of the instruments in the collection are on recordings of one kind or another. Just to put you into the picture as to what sort of what the violin has to deal with, because unfortunately there is already these things are tensioned up, and I think this briefly shows this quite clearly shows what those tensions are. The pressure on the bridge is approximately 10.5 kilograms. It all depends on what sort of strings are used. If you use all metal strings, that increases. And of course, with gut strings, it's a little less. The overall pressure from the neck to the tailpiece at the bottom, that's the tailpiece. This is the scroll, is approximately 25 kilograms, and it's with this tension, the violin plates. It's imperative that they are shaped in the way that they are, and the curves that are used for the plates basically are curtate cycloids, and this is something that actually goes right the way through the violin tradition. Most instruments made in Italy have this shape, and it was obviously a conscious decision to do that. No templates no arching templates which are used in the construction have been found, but basically all these instruments have this shape. Some of them are different. They have different arching heights, which is the height from of the top from there to the top of the plate, or the back to the and basically this is in the range. It can be anything from 13 or 14 millimeters to I'd say about 16 or 18 millimeters, and some instruments actually are a little taller. But basically, the good-sounding Strads, they have something within the range of 15 or 16 millimeters arching height, and this is what makes for this powerful sound. Too flat, you get too much noise, not enough sweetness. Too high, and you get sweetness, but not enough volume. Basically, this forces the neck to move up, or it puts tension on the neck. So usually there's a little bit of weakness here, but generally you don't see many instruments breaking across this weak point. Not even with pegs, peg holes drilled through, and the peg holes. The pegs are actually a tapered fit, so there's a little bit of tension in those holes, but made correctly and fitting well, that tension is obviously lessened. Now, basically, the violin. If we go back to the last picture, obviously the violin has C bouts, which are these things here. These allow the bow to articulate each individual string. And basically, that tension of 10.5 kilograms is taken by a bridge. The bridge, actually also made of maple, a very strong maple, is only about 2 grams in weight. I mean, it's a very, very thin structure, but placed directly in line with the string angle. It actually, the pressure of the strings goes right through the center of the bridge. If you move that bridge a few degrees forward or backwards, basically the bridge will bend and act like a spring. And the transference of movement and sound from the strings are no longer put into the sound box. The F-holes of the violin are basically designed to cut the plate or release the stiffness of the plate so that the bridge can move forwards and backwards and sideways and do probably all those things at once in 3 axes. And also the construction on the inside allows the bridge to rock from side to side. That pressure basically is taken by the curves of the F-hole. If ever you've wondered why F-holes are shaped the way they are, it's basically to reduce or minimize the possibility of a crack appearing here, as that bridge is rocking around. The pressure wants to be dissipated across the whole plate. So basically, these curves are very important, and that's why you don't see points coming down at sharp angles, because that would just focus the pressure on one or 2 grain lines. As I've said, the top plate is spruce and it's quarter sawn, so basically there is softwood fibres between the hardwood fibres that are running along the length of the instrument. So this is a consideration. These F-holes have to be shaped in such a way. And needless to say, they need to be a size so you can get a soundpost in, and which I'll explain a little later. So this is a well thought out system, and basically the actual length of the violin, once it was established, does not actually change very much. Also, the positioning of the bridge, there's some discrepancy between some makers, but it's only of 1 or 2 millimeters. Even the length of the scroll is of instruments coming from Italy. You can bet within a millimeter. That is, I mean, it's not the only thing used to identify, but it's usually within that 106 millimeter range. So obviously, all this information was passed around between the luthiers in Italy. Just to show you how the violin is constructed, you have a spruce top. You have the bass bar. As it's shown here, it shows the bass bar as an integral part of the top. This sometimes was the case, but generally with the Italian, well, always with the Italian instruments, it's a separate piece that's glued into place. The ribs, 1 millimeter thick. The back in the middle, there is a platform of about 4.5 millimeters. The edges run out to about 3 or 3.5. Basically, we've got a channel of purfling that runs. It's usually made of stained pear wood and poplar, and it runs all the way around the instrument. It's often thought as decoration, but I think it actually acts as an acoustic hinge. And I think the choice of material in that is kind of an important choice. Not that the instrument will sound bad if it doesn't have the right material, but it's one of the factors that make the instrument sound different. And every choice that is made will have an effect on the sound. Now to cracks. Unfortunately, like panels, instruments have cracks, and this is my little crack menu that shows all the sort of cracks that we end up with in the workshop. They're either they can be new cracks, which are very easy or relatively easy to deal with, but basically the pressure is on, because if it's a new crack and you glue it together and you get it wrong, it doesn't look very good, And the outer register crack, which is also quite common, it's gluing cracks while the plate's on. You can't manipulate the plate very well. It's very difficult to get clamps through the F hole to clamp, although you can do it, but you can't get so many. The alternative is you have a small crack, you take the top off, but the thing is, if you take the top off all the time, you're actually causing a little bit of damage, and you put the instrument at a little bit of risk. So sometimes taking the top off is saved for possibly when there's something more serious. You get the sinking crack, where you get a little dip in the top. You get usually that means there's an opening at the bottom, and again, it's a question of how you actually clamp the crack. Sometimes, though, this sinking is caused by clamping the crack in a plaster cast and leaving the clamps on for a long period of time. You've wet the spruce top. A repairman might have saturated the wood. They glue the crack. They clamp it in place into a plaster cast to hold everything, get everything registered, and sure enough, it's fine. It's fine actually until the wood material dries out thoroughly, and all the fibers on the top surface are slightly crushed, because you've had it clamped in a plaster cast. You've not allowed the wood to breathe, and eventually it contracts in. That crushing just contracts in, and basically you get a crushed surface. Going down, we've got the outer register and varnished. This is not so much of a problem, except you have to remove the new added varnish, which is indicated by the red. And also this area of crack is very tricky to actually clean, but it is quite possible. Once the varnish is so thin, it will actually it's quite easy then to use a little bit of solvent to remove that. The out of register and leveled and varnish crack, well, these are terrible because basically the repairman has removed the wood, and they've thought they've got the crack nicely in register, and this is a problem with not actually thinking ahead and planning the repair thoroughly enough, because you've done your fantastic repairs and everything. You think, oh gosh, that's out of register, and rather than just either leave it, what they do is they think, well, I'll just scrape that off, and then they try and revarnish it, and they find out that actually varnish is is a very tricky thing, and getting colour intensities right is very difficult. So they think, right, well, that coloured varnish needs to be very close to the wood, so they put colour close to the wood, and you end up with a stained something stained, and this is awful because you can't go back. You can't go back once someone's done that, and then the worst case scenario. Oh, but actually, just going back to this, you can actually put that crack back into register, and then make up the level with more varnish, because I mean, anyone that has done this, they probably that varnish isn't going to be looking too good. But the worst case scenario is wood removed on the inside too, so you have no chance of knowing where those levels are. And well, I wouldn't say no chance. You can actually figure out what has happened and where the level should be, but but you've lost a lot of material, and basically, that's quite. I mean, the last three are really frowned upon. The other crack. Oh, is that all? Oh, 2 minutes to go. Oh boy. God, I thought it'd be right. Okay, just quickly, we've got a shear crack, and basically dealing with shear cracks are very difficult because we're clamping from the side. So we need to put a little wooden stop there, and a little wood cleat there. So if you apply pressure from the side, the crack actually stops in place, and then you can apply pressure from the top and the bottom, and then that crack will come together. The anatomy of a crack is quite interesting. If we have a crack in maple, it has this 3D effect and ripple. It's a very topographical area, and basically on the right hand side we've got that's my crack there. So the slightly out of register crack will look something like this. If it's glued together and you get glue filling these areas, it's very difficult to manipulate that crack, and there's not a lot you can do with that. And of course here it says you've got a loss of angle and control, and basically you're now into the realms of changing the shape of the violin. So no longer you're actually moving the stress of the plate to somewhere else, and also you get this rippling effect. But there's something that the repairman can do. They can increase the pressure from the side, which crushes all the pores, and with lots of moisture, you can actually make that crack, to all intents and purposes, disappear. But the problem is, all that pressure is held within the crack. So basically, when the crack is completely dry and glue, you've got a reverse pressure wanting to push that thing apart, because it doesn't want to be there. And the more times it's cycled, it's actually, half of it's stuck together, and the other half is wanting to push it apart. Now, following on from that little, those first four pictures, you can actually correct this with slightly reversing the psychology or the procedure, and basically holding the crack into register, applying moisture, which you're probably cleaning the crack out now from the animal glue, and clamping very lightly, just in register, but not very much pressure, the wood fibers will swell. And providing you get the alignment right, correct, they'll give you the register that you require. And basically now you see on the right, this crack has gone back to the way it should be. Just very quickly, these are very simple tools. You can see how they work. We have G clamps, and they have double swivel. If we have a look here, double swivel G clamp, which is very good because it can conform to 2 levels. Nothing special there. But basically, the control in gluing the angle of the crack is achieved by using these little wooden blocks, or rather these wooden blocks. This is actual practice, where you use a wooden block, you're away from the crack, that's the crack there, you glue it at either side, and you use this wedge to control the angle. And basically you can have anything. This is a sort of mock-up demonstration here that just shows how you can manipulate that crack. Instead of a wedge here, I've got a screw on the side there, and you can manipulate that crack to either be open on the inside, or I'm not sure whether that's on the outside or not, but or that's fully closed, I think. And basically, you have full control over the varnish surface, which is on the. This is the varnish surface on the outside, so you have full control on getting that crack perfectly into register. And if you have multiple cracks, then you can move on to the next crack. If you don't achieve the correct alignment in one crack, if you move along to the next crack, you're pretty much lost, because you have no reference. And what most people do at that point is they would use a plasticast and try and they push that crack into register. But of course, that's not always possible. This is making those little blocks. You'll notice that the block is glued in one piece and sawed open. And this is our little safety cleat, which is placed at the end of the crack to stop the crack. Actually, any manipulation to a violin plate, which is very delicate. I mean, we're talking maybe 2.8 millimeters thick. You don't want actually that crack to start propagating up the violin. Otherwise, you're in trouble. So you put your little safety cleat there. You cut through these blocks, and then you can start applying you can start putting in your wedges. That's a close-up of basically how the wedge system works. It actually is a very good tool to use. In fact, I found it incredibly useful. It doesn't mean to say you don't need to use a plasticast. You might eventually have to use a plasticast, but the thing is, you don't actually have to do very much correction work in the plasticast, which is very difficult to actually, and incredibly time-consuming to make several plasticasts and alter the shape this way. Also, this little clamp at the back, it has a jewel thing. You see this little white thing here is a little slip of paper, and there's a little block of wood on top of this block, and the paper is actually it's adding a little extra force in one area, so you can actually bring a crack that's not into register. That's what we're doing here. We've got our little wedge there, our little piece of paper there. We've got this little G clamp that is putting pressure across the bottom of the crack. And here we're sort of helping that register to take place. There's an aluminium G clamp with a little bit of foam, compressed rubber, just adding a little pressure and a solid backing, because you can use this method using part counterforms as well. Basically, this is a violin that has a stretcher, and basically what we're using here is quite strong magnets to actually hold parts that are apart into register, so that when you actually put your stretcher on, you're actually not pushing other cracks that are out of register and open against each other and damaging the fibers. So it's used as a tool rather than have many clamps on the plate, which is very delicate. you actually increase the control. And the thing is, we're using all animal glue, so really a good fit is what we want, and we don't want to damage the fibers any more than they are damaged. I mean, some of these, there's probably about 30-odd cracks in here that need repairing, plus there's all this woodworm. Basically, all these are sunken cracks. But basically, that's what we're doing here. There's a picture of the making cleats. Also, another important thing is the fact that the wood we use for cleats is always quarter sawn. What we're using is very old stock, because old stock and air dried, and usually we try and match up the wood, but it's not always possible. And basically, the cleats that we use have to be you have to be thoughtful as to where the cleats are, because if we have cleats that are along the grain lines, and you just make them all in line, following the crack, exactly centered on the crack, you actually end up with a stress point next to the crack at the end of the cleat. So that is not very good. The next time anything happens to the instrument, you can bet that there'll be no damage along that crack line. You'll have it next to the cleats. So we stagger those cleats, and at the edges of the cleat, usually we go to almost zero. I mean, so the end of the cleat can flex a little bit. Also, of course, as far as the F-hole is concerned, we actually, if there's a crack running up to the F-hole, if we put a cleat that is not the full length or full width of the F-hole, we actually run the risk of two cracks appearing either side. So we have to dissipate that pressure, and that's what we do with this. I'm nearly finished. Okay. So I can't. That's all right. I never thought I'd finished. Okay. Sorry. That's. Hope that's been helpful or useful.
So much to tell. Thank you very much.